The most dangerous police dogs are not the ones that bark. They're the ones that suddenly refuse to move. Snow hammered the glass walls of Terminal 3 at Toronto Pearson Airport while exhausted passengers dragged winter boots across wet tile floors under the pale midnight lights. Outside, freezing rain hissed across the runway in silver sheets, bending the orange reflections of airport vehicles into long trembling streaks across the ice. Flights had already been delayed nearly 4 hours because of the storm moving down from northern Ontario, and frustration hung inside the terminal heavier than the scent of burnt coffee and damp wool coats. Near Gate C-17, a German shepherd stood completely still at the entrance of the boarding bridge. His sable fur shimmered dark beneath the fluorescent lights, thick around the neck and shoulders like weathered cedar after rain. A black harness marked with faded airport security patches rested across his back, though most travelers passing by no longer paid attention to him. To them, Hawk looked like another retired working dog nearing the quiet end of his life. But the men holding the leash knew better. Nathan Mercer tightened his grip slightly as the dog refused to step forward. "Come on, buddy," he murmured softly. Hawk did not move. The shepherd's ears lifted toward the aircraft doorway 20 meters ahead while airport staff continued boarding passengers around them. Nathan felt the old unease slide slowly beneath his ribs. 8 years. Thousands of security sweeps. Crowded terminals. Cargo inspections. Bomb threats that turned out false. Hawk had obeyed every command Nathan ever gave him without hesitation. Until now. A tired gate agent glanced over politely. "Everything okay, sir?" Nathan forced a small nod. "Yeah. He's just tired." But the answer felt wrong even before it left his mouth. Hawk was not tired. Nathan knew the difference. Tired dogs lowered their heads. They drifted. They avoided eye contact. Hawk looked alert. Focused. Listening to something nobody else could hear. The shepherd took one slow step forward onto the boarding bridge, then abruptly stopped again. This time a low vibration rolled faintly through his chest. Not a growl exactly. A warning held deep behind restraint. Nathan's stomach tightened instantly. God. Not again. Around them, passengers shuffled impatiently through the gate scanner carrying backpacks and winter parkas while snow rattled softly against the airport windows. Somewhere overhead, an announcement echoed through the terminal in English and French, blurred by static and distance. Hawk's amber eyes never left the aircraft doorway. Nathan crouched beside him slowly, gloved fingers brushing the thick fur near the dog's shoulder. "Talk to me," he whispered under his breath. Hawk inhaled once through his nose. Then again. Slow. Deliberate. Searching. Nathan followed the direction of the dog's stare into the aircraft cabin beyond the boarding bridge. Row lights glowed softly inside the plane while passengers settled into seats beneath overhead compartments clicking shut one by one. Nothing looked unusual. Until Nathan noticed a man halfway down the aisle struggling carefully with a portable oxygen machine beside an older passenger wrapped in a heavy gray scarf. The younger man looked exhausted. Mid-50s perhaps. Thin winter jacket despite the storm. Hands trembling slightly as he adjusted the oxygen tubing for the older brother seated beside the window. Nathan watched Hawk carefully. The shepherd's body stiffened the moment the machine powered on with a faint electronic hum. A tiny green light flickered against the side of the unit. Then Hawk stopped breathing for half a second. Nathan felt cold spread through his chest. Because he remembered another dog standing exactly like this years earlier inside a chemical storage terminal near Kingston Harbor. Valor had frozen beside a leaking container while warning alarms still showed green across every monitor. Nathan had trusted the machines instead of the dog. 23 minutes later, Valor died in an emergency veterinary clinic with oxygen tubes running beneath his muzzle while snow fell outside the window. Hawk suddenly backed away from the aircraft door. One step. Then another. His eyes never leaving the oxygen machine inside the cabin. The low vibration returned in his throat. Stronger now. Nathan slowly stood upright again while passengers brushed past them impatiently into the boarding bridge. "Sir," the gate agent asked carefully this time. "We need to finish boarding." Nathan looked toward the aircraft doorway once more. Then down at Hawk. The shepherd raised his eyes toward him for one brief second, and Nathan felt the same terrible instinct he had ignored once before claw its way back into his chest. Inside the aircraft cabin, the oxygen machine gave a faint metallic click. Nathan stared at the aircraft doorway while cold wind drifted through the boarding bridge carrying the sharp scent of snow and jet fuel from the runway outside. Around him, passengers continued moving forward with the slow irritation of people too tired to complain anymore. Winter coats brushed against carry-on bags. Wet boots squeaked across the metal floor panels beneath the pale fluorescent lights. But Hawk still refused to step inside the aircraft. The German Shepherd stood rigid beside Nathan's leg, ears angled forward toward the oxygen machine halfway down the cabin aisle. Another soft metallic click came from inside the device. Tiny. Almost delicate. Yet Hawk's breathing changed immediately. Nathan noticed the shift at once. "Sir," the gate agent said more firmly now, "we really need to finish boarding." Nathan looked back toward her. Young. Nervous. Probably no older than 25. She was already dealing with a 4-hour weather delay, frustrated travelers, and a storm shutting down half the airport. The last thing she needed was an aging retired officer holding up another flight because of a dog. Nathan understood that. But something inside his chest had already started tightening in ways he had not felt since Kingston Harbor. Hawk suddenly stepped sideways, placing himself directly in front of the aircraft doorway. Blocking it. The movement was calm. Controlled. Deliberate. Passengers slowed behind them. A businessman near the scanner sighed heavily beneath his breath. Someone farther back muttered something irritated in French. Nathan ignored all of it. His attention remained fixed on Hawk. Working dogs did not improvise. Every movement meant something. Nathan crouched again beside him. "What is it?" he whispered quietly. Hawk's eyes never left the oxygen machine inside the cabin. The older passenger near row 6 coughed weakly into a wool scarf while his younger brother adjusted the clear tubing beneath trembling fingers. The machine hummed softly against the seat beside them. Nothing dramatic. Nothing visibly dangerous. And yet Hawk looked at it the same way Valor once stared at a leaking chemical container moments before alarms failed across the entire dock terminal. Nathan slowly stood again. His instincts finally overpowered hesitation. "Hold boarding," he said. The gate agent blinked. "Excuse me. Just for 2 minutes." His voice sharpened slightly with old authority. "Please." She hesitated, then reluctantly stepped toward the scanner to stop the next passengers from entering. Groans immediately rose from the line behind them. Nathan barely heard any of it. He guided Hawk carefully into the aircraft cabin. Warm recycled air rolled over them carrying traces of coffee, wet fabric, and exhaustion. The older man near row 6 looked pale beneath the overhead lights, his breathing uneven despite the oxygen support. Beside him, the younger brother glanced up nervously as Nathan approached. "Everything all right?" the man asked quietly. Nathan gave a polite nod. "Airport security. Routine check." Not entirely true anymore. But not entirely false either. Hawk moved first. The Shepherd stopped 2 meters from the oxygen machine and refused to come closer. His body remained tense, head lowered slightly, nostrils pulling in slow measured breaths. Nathan noticed it immediately. Avoidance behavior. Hawk was not curious about the machine. He was wary of it. Nathan knelt beside the aisle seat and finally caught it himself. Faint. Almost invisible beneath the smell of cabin air. Heated plastic. His pulse slowed instantly. "How old is the unit?" he asked softly. The younger brother looked confused. "The machine." Nathan nodded. "A few years maybe," the man answered. "Why?" Another metallic tick sounded from inside the casing. This time Nathan saw the smallest flicker pass behind the green battery indicator. His stomach tightened hard. "Sir," Nathan said carefully now, "when was the last maintenance inspection done on this device?" The younger brother hesitated too long. Across the aisle, Hawk let out a low restrained growl that rolled softly through the cabin like distant thunder beneath snow. The growl was low enough that only the closest passengers heard it, but the effect inside the cabin changed immediately. Conversations faded. A woman near the rear galley slowly lowered her phone. Across the aisle, an elderly couple exchanged uncertain glances while snow streaked softly across the oval windows beyond them. Hawk remained frozen beside the row, eyes locked on the oxygen machine as though the black plastic shell itself carried a heartbeat only he could hear. Nathan studied the younger brother carefully now. Up close, the man looked worse than exhausted. Deep shadows rested beneath his eyes. His winter gloves were frayed near the fingertips from years of use. Melted snow darkened the shoulders of his thin jacket. Nothing about him suggested danger. Only strain. The older brother coughed again into the scarf wrapped around his mouth, each breath sounding shallow beneath the quiet hum of the machine. "Sir," Nathan asked calmly, "when was the battery replaced?" The younger man hesitated. Just for a second. But Nathan noticed. Police work had trained him to recognize the tiny pauses people made before telling difficult truths. "A few months ago," the man answered carefully. "Maybe 4. Another faint tick echoed from inside the machine. Hawk's ears twitched instantly. Nathan slowly reached toward the casing without touching it. Heat. Very slight. But wrong. Portable oxygen units always generated some warmth. This felt uneven. Like heat trapped too deep inside old wiring. The younger brother swallowed hard. "Is there a problem?" Nathan looked toward the battery indicator again. The green light flickered once before stabilizing. "What is your name?" "Elias." Nathan nodded once. "And your brother?" "Daniel." Beside the window, Daniel offered a weak, tired smile through the oxygen tubing. "Sorry for the trouble," he whispered hoarsely. The words landed heavier than Nathan expected. There was no anger in the old man's face. No defensiveness. Just embarrassment. The quiet humiliation of someone who had been sick too long and knew it burdened everyone around him. Nathan felt Hawk shift beside him. The shepherd took one careful step backward from the machine. That frightened Nathan more than aggression ever could. Hawk trusted explosives teams. Chemical teams. Crowded cargo inspections. But avoidance meant uncertainty. And uncertainty inside a pressurized aircraft cabin at 9,000 meters above the Rockies could become deadly very quickly. Behind Nathan, the gate agent stepped nervously into the cabin entrance. "Sir," she whispered, "operations is asking why boarding stopped." Nathan kept his eyes on the machine. "Tell them I need another minute." The woman hesitated. "The captain is already requesting pushback clearance." Another cough shook Daniel's chest. Elias immediately adjusted the blanket around his brother's shoulders with careful practiced hands. Small movements. Gentle ones. Nathan watched him quietly. This was not a criminal hiding something malicious. This was a man holding together the last pieces of someone he loved. "We almost missed the flight," Elias admitted softly without looking up. Roads from Kingston were nearly closed because of the storm. Snow rattled harder against the aircraft windows as if to confirm the memory. Nathan imagined the long winter drive through freezing rain and black highway ice. Hours behind the wheel beside a dying brother struggling to breathe. Hawk suddenly lifted his head sharply. Another metallic click came from inside the machine, louder this time. Then a smell drifted faintly into the aisle. Burnt insulation. Thin. Bitter. Nathan's pulse slowed into cold focus. He knew that scent. Every K-9 explosives officer learned it early. Overheated lithium cells. Hawk let out another restrained growl deep in his chest. Not loud. Urgent. Nathan stood immediately and looked toward the front galley. "Nobody powers this aircraft until I clear that machine," he said firmly. The gate agent stared at him in shock. "Sir, now." His voice carried something older suddenly. The command tone of a man who had once controlled chaotic scenes before people got hurt. Several nearby passengers turned toward him. The cabin lights flickered softly overhead while freezing wind moaned faintly through the boarding bridge outside. Elias looked pale now. "Please," he whispered, "we cannot miss this flight. My brother has an appointment at St. Paul's tomorrow morning." Nathan looked down at Hawk. The shepherd's eyes never left the machine. Then, very slowly, Hawk backed farther away from the row. Hawk's retreat sent a ripple of unease through Nathan stronger than any bark could have. The German shepherd never backed away unless instinct told him distance mattered. Snow swirled outside the aircraft windows beneath flashing amber runway lights while the cabin remained suspended in tense silence around row 6. Elias looked from Nathan to the dog with growing fear in his tired eyes. "Please," he whispered again, voice cracking softly, "my brother waited 8 months for this specialist." Daniel lowered his gaze toward the oxygen machine resting beside his knees. The green indicator still glowed steadily against the dark plastic casing, innocent enough beneath the overhead lights. But Nathan no longer trusted appearances. Not after Kingston. Not after Valor. The memory returned without warning. Bitter winter wind whipping across steel cargo containers near the harbor. Snow melting against concrete beneath emergency floodlights. Valor standing frozen in front of a shipping crate while warning monitors showed nothing dangerous inside. Nathan remembered gripping the leash too tightly that night, embarrassed by the dog's refusal to obey commands in front of younger officers. "Move him out," a supervisor had snapped impatiently. Nathan obeyed. 20 minutes later the container overheated from an undeclared chemical leak. Valor inhaled enough toxic fumes during the evacuation to destroy his lungs before sunrise. Nathan still remembered the silence inside the veterinary clinic afterward. No sirens. No alarms. Just the soft hiss of oxygen and snow tapping against dark windows while his partner struggled to breathe. Hawk shifted again beside Nathan's leg, pulling him sharply back into the present. The shepherd's ears flattened slightly now. Another bad sign. Nathan looked toward the machine once more and finally saw it. Condensation near the battery vent. Tiny droplets trembling along the casing seam where warmth met cold cabin air. His chest tightened. Lithium cells overheating inside sealed plastic. "Sir," the gate agent asked nervously from the aisle entrance. "Operations needs an answer now." Nathan slowly stood upright. Around him, irritated passengers watched with growing impatience. A man near row 4 checked his watch dramatically. Someone farther back muttered that they would miss a connecting flight in Calgary. The pressure inside the cabin kept building like static before lightning. Nathan knew exactly what came next. The easy choice. The practical choice. Ignore instinct. Trust the inspection sticker. Trust the machine. Let the aircraft leave. The same mistake twice. Hawk suddenly moved before Nathan could speak. The shepherd jerked forward with startling force, slipping free from Nathan's distracted grip on the leash. Gasps echoed through the cabin as Hawk charged directly toward row 6. Elias flinched hard, instinctively shielding Daniel with one arm. But Hawk did not lunge at either man. He planted himself directly in front of the oxygen machine. Rigid. Blocking it. His body formed a barrier between the device and everyone else in the aisle. Then he barked once. Loud enough that the entire aircraft fell silent. Nathan's blood turned cold. Because Hawk almost never barked during detection work. Not unless danger had crossed from suspicion into certainty. "Hawk!" Nathan snapped automatically. The shepherd did not move. His eyes remained locked on the machine while another low growl rolled from deep in his chest. Not aggression. Warning. The cabin crew froze. Even the passengers stopped complaining now. Somewhere near the cockpit, the boarding chime sounded softly as the aircraft prepared final departure procedures. Nathan stepped toward Hawk slowly. His pulse no longer raced. It narrowed. Focused. The way it always had during real emergencies. He crouched beside the dog and finally caught the smell fully this time. Burnt circuitry. Sharp ozone. Heat trapped too long beneath plastic. God. "Everybody stay seated," Nathan said quietly. His voice had changed now. Calm. Controlled. Dangerous in its certainty. Elias looked close to panic. "What is happening?" Nathan kept his eyes on the machine. "I think your battery is failing." Daniel's breathing quickened beneath the oxygen tubing. "No," Elias whispered immediately. "That cannot happen." The technician said it was safe. Another metallic click sounded inside the casing. Then the green indicator flickered orange for half a second before stabilizing again. Hawk barked once more. Harder this time. Nathan rose instantly and looked toward the front galley. Call airport fire services, he ordered. Now. And nobody touches that machine. For a few seconds, nobody inside the aircraft moved. Snow swept across the windows in pale waves beneath the flashing runway lights while the engines outside remained silent at the gate. Hawk stood unmoving in the aisle beside row 6, shoulders rigid beneath his faded harness, eyes fixed on the oxygen machine as though the black casing itself had become alive. Nathan could feel every passenger watching him now. The weight of expectation. The risk of being wrong. A senior flight attendant hurried down the aisle from the galley, her navy blazer slightly wrinkled from the long night delay. "Sir," she said carefully, keeping her voice low, "airport fire services are on standby, but operations needs confirmation before they stop departure." Nathan looked toward her. "There is no departure." His answer came instantly this time. No hesitation. No doubt. The woman studied his face for a moment and realized he meant it. Around them, frustration began spreading through the cabin again. A man near row 3 leaned into the aisle. "You are delaying an entire plane over a battery." Another passenger shook her head impatiently. "The machine passed security already." Nathan barely heard them. His attention stayed locked on Hawk. The German Shepherd had lowered his body slightly now, weight shifted backward as if instinct kept urging him farther from the device while duty forced him to remain close. Nathan knew that posture too well. Valor had stood exactly the same way near the Kingston leak. Torn between fear and obedience. The memory cut through him sharply enough to hurt. He remembered kneeling beside the emergency kennel hours later while snow piled against the clinic windows outside. Valor's breathing had grown weaker beneath oxygen tubes and warm blankets until finally there was only silence. Nathan had not touched another working dog for nearly 11 months after that night. But Hawk remained beside him now. Still trusting him to listen. Elias suddenly reached toward the machine. "Maybe I should turn it off," he whispered anxiously. Hawk barked instantly. Loud enough to echo through the cabin ceiling. Daniel flinched hard against the seat while several passengers gasped in alarm. Nathan caught Elias's wrist before his hand touched the controls. "Do not." The younger man stared at him with panic rising behind exhausted eyes. "If the battery dies, my brother cannot breathe properly." Nathan softened his voice carefully. "I understand." Daniel gave a weak cough beside the window, his face pale beneath the cabin lights. "Elias," he whispered through shallow breaths, "it is all right." But Elias shook his head immediately. "No. We came too far for this." Nathan finally noticed the worn hospital bracelet still hidden beneath Daniel's coat sleeve. St. Paul's Pulmonary Unit. Vancouver. A specialist transfer. The realization settled heavily in his chest. These men were not reckless. They were desperate. There was a difference. Another faint clicking noise came from inside the machine. Then a soft crackle. Tiny. Electrical. Hawk backed away another step. Nathan smelled it more clearly now. Hot insulation buried beneath melting plastic. The kind of smell most people ignored until smoke appeared. A ground operations supervisor entered the cabin moments later wearing a reflective winter jacket dusted with snow. His expression already carried irritation before he even spoke. "We have 42 departures delayed tonight," he snapped quietly toward Nathan. "If this is a false alarm, it is not." Nathan's tone stopped him cold. The old authority had fully returned now. Calm. Exact. Dangerous because it did not need volume. Nathan pointed toward the machine. "That battery is overheating internally." The supervisor frowned. "You cannot know that." Nathan glanced down at Hawk. "He does." Silence followed. Not because people suddenly believed the dog. Because deep down, they had all started smelling it too. The faint bitter scent drifting slowly through the cabin air. The supervisor finally noticed the flickering battery light. Green. Orange. Green again. His face changed immediately. Another crackle sounded from inside the casing. Then for half a second, a thin ribbon of gray smoke curled upward near the vent seam. Daniel closed his eyes weakly against the seat while Elias whispered something trembling in French beneath his breath. Hawk let out one final low growl. And outside the aircraft, red emergency lights suddenly flashed across the snow. Red emergency lights painted the falling snow outside in pulses of crimson and white while airport fire crews raced across the frozen tarmac toward the aircraft stairs. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere had changed. Completely. Nobody complained anymore. Nobody checked watches or cursed the delay. Fear had a way of silencing strangers faster than authority ever could. The thin ribbon of smoke drifting from the oxygen machine vanished almost immediately into the recycled cabin air, but the smell remained. Bitter. Electrical. Wrong. Hawk stood motionless in the aisle beside Nathan, his chest rising slowly beneath the faded harness while his eyes never once left the device near Daniel's knees. The overhead lights reflected softly across the shepherd's amber eyes, and Nathan felt something painful tighten in his throat. Trust. After everything that happened with Valor, the dog still trusted him enough to keep warning him. The senior flight attendant moved quickly down the aisle with a fire containment bag held tightly against her chest. Her hands trembled despite years of training. Fire services are boarding now, she whispered. Nathan nodded once. Keep everyone seated and calm. Calm. The words sounded fragile inside a metal tube filled with exhausted strangers and the growing scent of overheating lithium. Daniel coughed weakly into the oxygen tubing again, each breath thinner now. Elias leaned close beside him, voice shaking. We should disconnect it before it gets worse. Nathan turned immediately. No sudden movement. Elias looked at him helplessly. Then what do we do? He needs oxygen. Before Nathan could answer, the machine gave another sharp click. Louder this time. The orange warning light blinked rapidly across the casing. Hawk's ears flattened instantly. Nathan saw the change in the dog before he heard the sound that followed. A faint hiss escaped from inside the battery compartment. Like pressure building somewhere too hot and too confined. The firefighter entering from the front galley heard it too. Everybody stay seated, she ordered calmly while pulling protective gloves tighter over her wrists. Snow melted across her dark jacket and dripped quietly onto the cabin floor beneath flashing emergency lights outside. Nathan stepped beside her immediately. Old instincts moved through him again with frightening ease. Isolate the source. Clear surrounding rows. Control panic before panic controls people. Move passengers from rows 4 through 8, he told the crew. Slowly. The flight attendants obeyed at once now. Nearby passengers unbuckled carefully while carrying coats and bags farther down the aisle under soft instructions in English and French. No shouting. Just the uneasy rustling of frightened people trying not to make things worse. Daniel looked up weakly toward Nathan. I am sorry, he whispered through shallow breaths. Nathan shook his head immediately. You did nothing wrong. But Elias closed his eyes in shame. I replaced the battery myself, he admitted quietly. The words barely rose above the hum of cabin ventilation. The original one died last winter. The approved replacement cost more than rent. Nathan looked at him silently. Outside the windows, snow whipped harder beneath the runway floodlights while emergency vehicles surrounded the aircraft in flashing colors. Elias rubbed trembling hands across his face. A man online sold me a cheaper one from Montreal, he whispered. He said it worked the same. Another hiss came from the machine. This time thin heat shimmered visibly above the vent near the handle. The firefighter cursed softly beneath her breath. Thermal runaway, she murmured. Hawk suddenly backed away another full step. Not panic. Survival instinct. Nathan understood immediately. The battery was no longer simply overheating. It was escalating. Fast. Daniel's breathing became rougher without steady oxygen flow. Elias reached instinctively toward the machine again, desperate terror overtaking caution. Hawk barked sharply the second his hand moved. The sound cracked through the cabin like a gunshot. Elias froze. Nathan grabbed his wrist firmly. Listen to me, he said quietly but intensely. If you touch that battery now, this entire cabin could ignite. Elias stared at him in horror. Tears finally broke loose down his exhausted face. He is my brother. Nathan loosened his grip slowly. And we are going to keep him alive. Another metallic pop echoed from inside the casing. Then the warning light turned solid red. The solid red warning light cast a faint glow across Daniel's pale hands while snow hammered harder against the aircraft windows outside. Airport fire crews moved quickly beneath the flashing emergency strobes, their silhouettes blurred through sheets of freezing rain and runway mist. Inside the cabin, the smell of overheated electronics had thickened enough now that passengers near the rear rows covered their noses instinctively. Hawk remained beside Nathan in complete silence. No more barking. No more growling. The shepherd had entered the strange stillness working dogs reached when instinct fully accepted danger as real. Nathan recognized it immediately. Valor had gone silent that way too. The firefighter crouched carefully beside the oxygen machine without touching it. Heat shimmered visibly above the casing now. The battery cells are venting, she whispered. If pressure breaks containment, she did not finish the sentence. She did not need to. Nathan already knew. Inside a sealed aircraft cabin filled with oxygen lines, synthetic fabric, and overhead wiring, fire spread faster than fear itself. Daniel suddenly doubled over coughing, weak fingers gripping the armrest beneath the cabin lights. Elias immediately supported him with trembling hands. He needs oxygen now, he whispered desperately. Please. Nathan's jaw tightened. Every second mattered now. Remove the machine too aggressively and they risked triggering ignition. Leave it running and the thermal reaction could worsen. The firefighter looked toward him. We need to isolate the battery immediately. Nathan glanced at Daniel's struggling breaths. Then down at Hawk. The German shepherd's eyes shifted briefly toward the front galley. Toward the aircraft exit. Nathan understood at once. Hawk was not focused on the machine anymore. He was focused on escape routes. The dog was preparing for the possibility they were about to lose control of the situation. A cold weight settled deep inside Nathan's chest. We move Daniel first, he said firmly. The firefighter nodded instantly. Agreed. Elias looked terrified. Without oxygen. The paramedics outside already have emergency support ready. Nathan kept his voice calm. Steady. But we need him off this aircraft now. Another hiss escaped from the battery compartment. Louder this time. Tiny tendrils of smoke curled upward through the vent seams before disappearing into the cabin airflow. A baby somewhere near the rear rows began crying softly while a mother whispered reassurance in French. The atmosphere inside the aircraft felt painfully fragile now. Like a church moments before terrible news arrives. Nathan stepped closer beside Daniel's seat. Can you stand if we help you? Daniel gave the smallest nod, though his breathing remained shallow and strained. Elias wiped tears quickly from his face before leaning closer to his brother. Easy, he whispered softly. Just a little farther. Hawk suddenly moved then. The shepherd stepped forward and placed himself beside Daniel's aisle seat, body turned outward toward the cabin as though shielding the two brothers while they prepared to move. Nathan felt his throat tighten unexpectedly at the sight. Even after retirement. Even after months away from active duty. Hawk was still working. Still protecting people. The firefighter carefully disconnected the oxygen tubing while another emergency responder arrived carrying portable emergency air support from the aircraft door. The second the tubing detached, the machine emitted a sharp cracking sound from deep inside the casing. Passengers gasped. Hawk's ears snapped backward instantly. Nathan reacted without thinking. Move now. The responders lifted Daniel carefully from the seat while Elias supported his weight from the other side. The old man's breathing rattled softly in the cold cabin air as they guided him toward the front exit beneath flashing emergency lights outside. Nathan stayed behind beside the machine. The firefighter looked at him sharply. You need to back away too. But Nathan did not move immediately. The red warning light blinked faster now beneath the rising heat. Tiny cracks had begun forming along the battery seam. Hawk remained beside Nathan's leg despite every instinct telling him to retreat farther. Loyalty stronger than fear. Nathan looked down at him quietly. You still trust me that much, huh? Hawk glanced up once beneath the dim overhead lights. Then another loud pop burst from inside the machine. The pop echoed sharply through the cabin ceiling like ice cracking across a frozen lake. Several passengers cried out in panic while the warning light on the oxygen machine began flashing violently red beneath the rising heat. Thin smoke curled upward in twisting gray threads that carried the bitter scent of melting circuitry through the recycled cabin air. Hawk immediately stepped in front of Nathan again, shoulders rigid, body low, protecting him by instinct even now. Nathan felt something inside his chest nearly break at the sight. Valor used to do the same thing. Always placing himself between danger and his handler as though loyalty mattered more than survival. The firefighter grabbed Nathan's arm. "We are out of time." Nathan nodded once. Cold focus settled over him completely now. No fear. No hesitation. Just the clear sharp calm that arrived during the worst moments of police work. Outside the aircraft windows, emergency crews moved quickly beneath swirling snow while red and blue lights reflected across the frozen runway like shattered glass. The rest of the passengers had already been pushed farther down the cabin under flight crew instructions, but terror still lingered in every face turned toward row 6. Nathan looked toward the machine again. Heat distortion shimmered visibly around the casing now. One battery seam had split open enough to expose a faint orange glow deep inside. "Containment bag," the firefighter ordered. Another responder rushed forward carrying a large thermal fire bag lined with thick silver insulation. The hiss inside the machine grew louder. Angry now. Alive. Hawk let out one deep restrained growl and backed away another careful step while keeping his body between Nathan and the aisle. The shepherd's instincts were screaming at him to flee, yet he refused to leave his partner alone. Nathan slowly crouched beside him. "You were right," he whispered softly. Hawk glanced toward him for half a second. In the flashing emergency light, his amber eyes looked almost human. Trusting. Tired. Still waiting for Nathan to listen. The firefighter carefully slid the thermal bag open near the machine. "We need to move fast," she warned. Nathan nodded once and stepped forward beside her. Together they reached toward the overheating unit with controlled movements while smoke thickened around the seat row. The metal handle felt dangerously warm even through protective gloves. Then suddenly another sharp crack burst from inside the casing. A shower of tiny sparks flickered briefly beneath the vent seam. Passengers screamed farther back. Hawk barked once. Loud. Urgent. Nathan reacted instantly. Now. The firefighter lifted the machine free while Nathan guided the thermal bag beneath it. Smoke poured harder the moment the device moved. The orange glow inside the cracked battery seam brightened for one terrifying second before disappearing into the insulated containment bag as the zipper sealed shut. Silence followed. Heavy. Disbelieving silence. The hissing sound dulled beneath the insulated lining while the firefighters carried the containment bag rapidly toward the aircraft exit. Nathan finally exhaled for what felt like the first time in several minutes. Outside the open aircraft door, paramedics loaded Daniel carefully into an ambulance beneath blowing snow while Elias stood nearby wrapped in a blanket, his face pale with shock and guilt. The younger brother looked toward Nathan as firefighters emerged carrying the smoking containment bag past the aircraft stairs. One emergency responder shook his head quietly. 5 more minutes in the air and this could have ignited overhead compartments. Elias covered his face with trembling hands. Snow melted across his hair and jacket beneath the flashing lights. "I almost killed people," he whispered brokenly. Nathan stepped down onto the icy tarmac beside him. "No," he answered quietly. "You were trying to save your brother." Elias looked toward Hawk standing calmly near the aircraft doorway now. The German shepherd's fur moved gently in the freezing wind, while snowflakes settled across his back without bothering him at all. The younger man's voice cracked softly. "That dog knew before anyone else." Nathan followed his gaze. Hawk looked older tonight beneath the storm lights. Gray touched the fur around his muzzle now. Retirement papers already signed. A quiet home waiting somewhere in Vancouver with strangers prepared to adopt him. But standing there on the frozen runway, surrounded by ambulance lights and drifting snow, Hawk did not look retired at all. He looked exactly like what he had always been. A police dog still trying to save lives. By the time the storm finally began weakening over Pearson Airport, the eastern sky had turned the color of cold silver above the runway lights. Snow still drifted across the tarmac in thin, restless sheets, but the violent wind had softened into something quieter now. Ambulance doors closed gently near the terminal service road while paramedics prepared Daniel for transfer to Toronto General before the next available medical flight west. Inside the ambulance, warm light glowed softly against the old man's tired face while oxygen flowed steadily through fresh hospital tubing. For the first time that entire night, his breathing looked easier. Elias stood nearby beneath the falling snow with both hands pressed against his mouth, overwhelmed by exhaustion more than fear now. The emergency crews had finished their reports. Passengers were being rerouted onto replacement flights. Airport staff moved slowly through the freezing slush carrying equipment cases beneath the fading flash of emergency strobes. But Nathan remained standing near the aircraft stairs beside Hawk, unable to leave yet. The German shepherd sat calmly at his side, snow gathering across the dark fur along his back and shoulders. Retirement tags still hung quietly from the harness strap. Nathan looked at them for a long moment. Temporary foster transfer. Vancouver. Final relocation paperwork. The official end of a working life. Hawk lifted his head slightly and leaned against Nathan's leg with familiar silent trust. The simple contact hit harder than Nathan expected. He remembered another winter morning years earlier outside the veterinary clinic in Kingston. Standing alone beneath pale dawn light while carrying an empty leash in numb frozen hands. The guilt after Valor's death had followed him everywhere since then. In grocery store parking lots. In sleepless nights. In every airport hallway where working dogs passed him wearing police harnesses and wagging tails. Nathan had spent nearly a year convincing himself he no longer deserved another partner. Yet Hawk had never stopped believing in him. Even tonight. Even when instinct told him to run. Elias approached slowly through the snow, then stopped in front of the dog. His eyes were red from crying. Without speaking, he lowered himself onto one knee against the freezing pavement and gently rested a trembling hand against Hawk's neck. The shepherd remained perfectly still beneath the touch. "Thank you," Elias whispered. His voice broke halfway through the words. "You saved my brother." Hawk blinked slowly beneath the runway lights while warm breath drifted from his muzzle into the cold Canadian air. Nathan watched the scene quietly. No dramatic speeches. No heroic music. Just a tired man kneeling before an aging police dog because gratitude sometimes looked more like grief than celebration. A firefighter passing nearby glanced toward Nathan and smiled faintly. "Your partner did good tonight." Nathan almost corrected her automatically. Retired dog. Transfer case. Final assignment. But the words never came. Because deep down, it no longer felt true. Hawk was still watching him the same way working dogs always watch the one person they trusted most in the world. Waiting. Ready. Beside the ambulance, Daniel motioned weakly toward Nathan through the open rear door. Nathan walked over slowly while snow hissed beneath his boots. The older man looked fragile beneath the thermal blankets, but his eyes remained clear. "Officer," he whispered softly through the oxygen mask, "that dog heard death coming before the rest of us did." Nathan glanced back toward Hawk standing beneath the flashing runway lights. "Yeah," he answered quietly. "He usually does." Daniel studied him for another long moment. "Then maybe God was not done with either of you yet." The ambulance doors closed gently after that. Red lights reflected across wet pavement as the vehicle disappeared slowly through the snow toward the highway beyond the airport gates. Silence settled over the runway once more. Hawk walked back to Nathan and sat beside him without command. The leash hung loose between them beneath the pale dawn sky. Nathan reached down carefully and rested one hand against the thick fur behind the dog's ears. Warm. Steady. Alive. Hawk closed his eyes for just a second beneath the touch. Then Nathan picked up the leash fully again and whispered the words he never thought he would say after losing Valor. "Come on, partner. Let us go home."